Just do a big namaste from El Paso, or as they say in Texas, howdy.
And we welcome you all on behalf of the Change Designers team here. And we are a communication organization, and we really try and work every day for communicating outcomes that matter for a good life. Because there is so much that we could solve if we all interacted well with each other.
Today we are very, very excited and honored to present to you the Change Designer Spotlight Speaker Series, Centrestage for Innovation. So it's a very unique platform wherein every week selected experts will throw spotlight on innovations that have been path-breaking, on strategies that are relevant and issues that really matter. And this week, we are very, very happy to collaborate with the Positively Abundant Collaborative.
I give each of you a big hug, remote as it may be.
Dr. Singhal will lead us into the very lovely, positively deviant approach on how do we harness distributed wisdom and collective intelligence so that we can all move towards a better, a good life. This is an effort purely 100% to support our friends and family of Shramik Bharti in UP who are doing incredible work on the ground to support COVID-19 relief. So all your contribution is going to Shramik Bharti so that they can help more and more families too. So the brilliant life of these abundant ants tells us these very simple two things. One, you can be eosocial, which means you can be in a cooperative environment with no leader and respond to communication patterns with roles that are adaptable and with trust that each one of us is doing what we need to do.
And I think it is this harmonious interaction of all these ants that actually makes them the most social creatures. And they usually interact not with the community as a whole, but they focus more on the local interactions. And it is through that they create that global community and the opportunities for interactions.
You wouldn't believe, but ants don't look at the bigger picture. Ants just look at who are they talking to locally and be able to accomplish their task just on a shared set of rules that look around, see who you're meeting, and look what they're doing, and you'll be able to accomplish your goal. And that's the power of doing simple actions for making complex tasks easier through communication. And first question I think we want to ask you is, what is positive deviance and what relevance does it have for us?
So what is positive deviance? Positive deviance is a problem-solving approach that focuses on what is working amid adversity. And this is important to say that we are looking at a situation that is problematic, that has tremendous adversity, and then you choose to focus amidst this adversity on that is working. So you ask the question, has someone solved the problem who should not have? Who is least likely to? And if they have, then you want to know what is it that they are doing. So, the classic case, and maybe I'll just mention this briefly, is of Vietnam. Now we have used positive deviance, and Anu and Pallavi, you've used it in India in many different ways. But the classic case in Vietnam, a simple question was asked. In the year 1990, 65% of the children under the age of 5 in Vietnam were severely malnourished. And a very simple question was asked by, you can say, my positive deviance gurus whom I met in 2004, Monique and Jerry Sternan. And they began with work in 4 communities. And the question was simply, are there children under the age of 5 who come from the poorest of poor families, but who are well nourished? And if there are some children from the poorest of poor families who are nourished, then they are deviants because they are not the norm. If you are the norm, then if you come from a poor remote family, you are malnourished. And they are called positive deviants because they have solved the problem. So in the first 4 communities, every child was weighed, their growth charts were charted. And out of 3,000 kids, there were a few dozen who came from the poorest of poor families, from the remotest of most remote villages, communities and households that had very little land, maybe no cows and no goats, but for some strange reason, their children were well nourished. So this is the whodunit, no? I mean, they've already solved the problem. Why do we need experts? Why do we need to bring in, protein biscuits from Denmark and create warehouses and distribute them when the wisdom to solve the problem lies with these few dozen people, even though they're out of 3,000. So then you ask the question, what is it that they are doing, which others are not doing? They must be doing something. They don't have access to extra resources. And what they found in Vietnam was really intriguing. For instance, one of the uncommon behaviors of the mothers whose children were well nourished was that they took the greens of sweet potato plants, shakarkandi ke patte, we are dealing with leaves, the shoots, and while most people would use them as, throw them away or use them as fodder for goats and cows, these mothers were adding the greens of sweet potato plants to their children's meals. And, you can now do an expert-based nutrition analysis, and you realize that sweet potato greens have calcium, it has vitamin A, beta carotene, it has magnesium, iron, it has all the micronutrients that a young child needs. So the key is that the resources are accessible to all. The other thing that these young mothers of young children were doing is, and you may picture this, Vietnam is a country which has rice fields after rice fields. And rice has a cropping cycle of about 120 days, which means in Vietnam you can grow rice because they also have abundant water, the mighty Mekong and just the socio-ecology. That rice fields are waterlogged. And when you have waterlogged rice fields, you have tiny crustaceans. You have little shrimps and little crabs and little shellfish, and they are there for the plenty. Now, most Vietnamese don't consider them as being human food, because if you want to eat your shrimps and crabs, you go to the river or you get them from the ocean. These are teeny tiny, and most of it is considered as being duck food or chicken food. So I've been in Vietnam where you see farmers come along with their flock of ducks and, they are eating these little shrimps. Now, some mothers were spending half a minute extra after they worked in the rice fields, and they dug down and they would pick up these little tiny shrimps and crabs, come home, remove the crust, and have little dots of pulp. And they would add that in some ways to the children's meal. And now you can put on your expert's hat and you can say, okay, that's protein. So the idea behind positive deviance is there are people who against all odds have solved the problem, who have solved the problem and have been doing so for a long period of time. And we don't have the eyes to see it because as experts, we are trained in gap analysis. We are trained in asking the question, what's not working? We are trained in looking at the problem. And when you begin with the problem, you don't look at what's working. You don't look at what are the assets. You don't look at what is it that we have to work with within that local condition. So I'll just make a few other small little points which are important. Deviance is, in a sociological sense, not a cherished word. No, deviance is bad. When we talk about positive deviance, we are talking about statistical deviance. We are talking about those people who have solved the problem when most others of their kind have not. So it's statistical deviance, and also what they do is statistically non-normative, right? So the uncommon behaviors of adding greens or adding sweet potato plants. What positive deviance, this approach allows you to do, because you're asking a data-driven question, is to see what is unseen. You know, the solutions are there. These people have solved the problem. We don't see it. We don't see it because we wear our expert hats. So it makes possible to see what is typically unseen. And so it questions our own notions of expertise. Here, the wisdom lies with the people, the ones who are there in the rice fields. And maybe for those of us who are interested in asking good academic questions, and you know, I always try to challenge myself to do so, we always grow in the direction of the questions we ask. We should never forget that. If we ask a question which has been asked before, you know, you are in some ways regurgitating what is already known. So positive deviance allows you to ask questions which have not been asked. And that is where the growth lies.
That's a very good way to think about distributed wisdom, because as you're saying, the wisdom is there. We have to make the effort to harness it and translate it, or in some way use the intelligence of the people to be able to make that effective for change. So thank you so much for that. I think, Pallavi, I'd like to invite you for a quick story on women entrepreneurs in India.
So we actually found this distributed wisdom in women entrepreneurs in rural Uttar Pradesh. So as you can see on my left, we met this one woman entrepreneur who every day at the close of her business would simply open her tiny notebook and record 2 numbers in it. The first number was the number with which she started her business in the morning. And the second number was the one with which she ended her business. So both numbers helped her to project the amount of expenses that she had for the day, the amount of income that she had, and that actually helped her assess the losses that she was in and helped her assess her growth. Similarly, we met Sanno, who you can see on my right. So Sanno was this one very interesting, very brave woman entrepreneur whom we met. And she actually had a little tailoring center, a Sanno Silai Center. And very uniquely, the name of her shop was actually in her own name. And usually what happens in rural areas is that women end up naming their shops either in the names of their husbands or children or in the names of gods and goddesses. So what did this do for Sanno? It actually created like a Google landmark in the entire village. People started identifying spots in the village through Sanno's tailor center. People started saying, "Are wo Sanno ki dukaan hai na, uske paas hi aa jana." And it recognized Sanno in the entire community as a strong woman entrepreneur. So this distributed wisdom was identified by women themselves. And as the facilitated process, they identified that these behaviors mark the collective intelligence of the entire community that recognizes these women as successful women entrepreneurs.
And so we translated these tiny findings of distributed wisdom and intelligence from these women entrepreneurs to urban India, saying, can we have our little notebook of Hisab ki Kitab? If she can note it every day, can we do it? And if she can have her advertisement outside her shop, can we have it in our business cards? I think rural women entrepreneurs have a lot to teach urban women entrepreneurs. And that's the kind of distributed wisdom positive deviance also allows us to look at.
So, sir, if I may now ask you that how is positive deviance as an approach relevant in today's times of COVID-19?
Before I go to that, let me just say, given I collaborated with you on this rural entrepreneurship study, the question that you asked, which was not asked, was, are there women who come from the poorest of poor backgrounds in the state of UP, in certain districts, who don't have any experience in entrepreneurship in terms of their family, who don't have much support from their husband or their in-laws, who are quite fearful to take their first loan, and who have not just taken their first loan, but have repaid it back many times, 100%, and who are thriving in their business. We are looking at deviants who are not the norm, because you would consider that if a woman didn't have any experience, didn't have support, was fearful of taking loan, she would not make it. So it was a very systematic study that you, Anu and Pallavi, did to try to find the positively deviant, uncommon practices of those who were succeeding against all odds. And you've just given an example. Okay, so Pallavi, your question was something about how is positive deviance relevant today, and especially in these times of COVID-19. Very relevant, very relevant. And why do I say so? Relevant at multiple levels. So for instance, you can ask, is there a country with all odds that has done better than other countries? You can ask it at that level. Is there a city that has done better? So for instance, I do a lot of work in Colombia in South America. And while Bogota, the capital city, between a 6-week period had close to 200 new cases each year, and that is pretty good given the distribution of COVID cases in other South American countries like Ecuador or Peru or Brazil. Colombia was doing very well. Bogota, about 200 cases a year. But the city of Medellin, the city of, as sometimes known as the city of Pablo Escobar, an average of 7 cases each particular day. And so you can ask the positively deviant question at many levels. Is there a neighborhood that has done better and without any extra resources? And you can also then take this question and ask, is there some country, some administrative unit, some neighborhood, some family, some individuals who have done better in preparing, who have done some ways remarkably well in preventing, who have done remarkably well in containing, who have done remarkably well in testing, who have done remarkably well in mitigating, and also who have done remarkably well in recovering. So for instance, I'm talking about Medellin in Colombia. They have used the opportunity of COVID-19 to now come up with their eco plan. And so they have used the time to expand their bike lanes. And they are going to have 200% more bike lanes than they have now. They have introduced 50,000 electrical bicycles for rental in the city of Medellin. They have decided that they are going to cut their carbon emissions by 25% in the next 10 years. So, but they are not the norm. They're deviants. Most of us are just coping. And they did a remarkable job of preparing, of preventing, of containing, of testing, of mitigating, and of recovering. But if you would allow me, can I give you an example which may hit home? It comes from France. So you may know that almost 40 to 45% of the deaths in the United States, as also in many countries of Western Europe, the countries that we quote unquote look upon as being developed, have been in nursing homes. And of course, there's a demographic reason for that, because nursing homes have people who, are over the age of 65. So I want to tell you the story of a nursing home, a deviant nursing home in France, which I have been following. It's near the city of Lyon. And on March 15th, when, lockdowns began in every part of the world, the manager of this nursing home, which has 107 patients, the average age, the French live a long time, the average age of the nursing home was 87. 107 patients, on average 87-year-old men and women. Valerie Martin, the owner, called all her staff, and she had a staff of 50 people who came in and out. And she said, and they did a testing of everyone. And at that point in time, the number of cases was 0. Data is important. She said, my mission is that we are going to, while nursing homes are being ravaged by COVID-19, in my nursing home, the number of cases will be 0. So here is what I propose. And what did she propose? She basically said, of the 50 of you, I want to ask you, how many of you are able and willing to quarantine yourself with the residents for the next 3 weeks? And, there are 50 staff members, and 29 of them said that, they didn't have family responsibilities, that they cared enough for their clients, the people who were part of the nursing homes, that the next day they would bring their sleeping bags and they would bring their, Ludos and Sapsidi and all the Pictionaries and all the games that they love to play, and they would come out and camp. Now, this lockdown, this quarantining, first happened for 3 weeks. Then, of course, it was extended nationally. So at that time, she also asked, how many of you can extend it? There were 12 people who quarantined with the residents for a full 47 days. And they did testing. There were no visitations allowed. There was nobody coming in and out. And remarkably, and if you are a relative, let's say the son and daughter of a person who is in a nursing home, the French rules, as were the rules in other countries, was that nursing homes should quarantine each and every client in their room. And you can imagine what that does, right? To an 87-year-old, when they're confined to their room, when they can't even move around within their own facility. But by following this process of quarantining with the clients, it was perfectly okay for clients to be moving around. And they made it a celebration. And my favorite story they had birthday parties and a lot of banter, but there was a man, a widower, he was 95 years old, and there was since they were celebrating birthdays, he said, well, my marriage anniversary is today. And of course, I don't have a wife, but aren't you going to celebrate my marriage anniversary? I mean, he's a French man, so, maybe you got to keep that in mind, although I'm sure that men anywhere might cherish that longing or that desire. The staff said, yeah. And then he said, I want to marry this young nurse. And, and so they did a mock wedding, right? I mean, they had a mock wedding. They tied little white sheets behind her. They had her gown flowing, and, they brought flowers, and this man had his mock wedding, and it was all for fun. So all this to say that there are some nursing homes, very few, who have acted in uncommon ways, where infection rates have been 0, where people have not been quarantined in their rooms and faced the social, in this case, it would have been not just physical isolation, social isolation. And there's so much we can learn from this. So you may ask the question, how does this apply to you and me? Oh, it's a fancy home, nursing home in France. What does it have to do with what I'm doing in India? The principle, the uncommon practice, is the notion of the bubble, the social bubble that you create. You can expand that bubble. If you know of people whom you trust, maybe you've been tested or who are not displaying any signs, you can decide that that would be your social bubble, and you will not socialize outside of it. And the implications are tremendous for how that one little uncommon practice of the expanded bubble can manifest itself in different ways in our lives. So COVID-19, positive deviance. Positive deviance is an intractable problem. There are some countries that have done better. Ghana has done a remarkable job with what is known as pool testing. And you say, what is pool testing? Well, in most countries, you know, one person, one test. And a test is pretty much useless if you don't have results back quickly. What does Ghana do? Because Ghana has a low rate of infection, and you typically will do pool testing only when the rates of infections are low, is you take blood samples from 50 people, mix them up in one vial, and you test. It's one test. And if you get a positive, then, you know, maybe you can now test individually, or now you can test those who display symptoms or who seem to be at the highest risk. But if you get a negative, then you can basically assume that these 50 people are fine. And, you know, in terms of opening up, in terms of, so low cost, quick, and so, I mean, so you can use the same tests, but use the same tests differently. I can give you 1,000 examples.
And tell us how people are actually using the PD approach in the current times.
It's amazing how care can transform how we feel, how we experience life, and how we live it. And I think one organization who does it beautifully is our friends at Karma Primary Healthcare in Haryana and Rajasthan. And I know they're expanding. And they use a telemedicine model where you do not need to leave your social bubble or your village to go to a city and show to a doctor when you're ill. So a low-cost model has been established wherein you can meet a doctor through an e-consult while a nurse very carefully and compassionately mediates that. And Karma has a beautiful story to it, but some of the nurses have their very bright sense of care. So when a patient comes, they do not treat the patient as like a sick body. They treat the patient like a human being who needs care and love. And so while the nurse takes the SpO2 and the you know, heartbeat and blood pressure, the nurse is also engaging very carefully in asking, how is the person doing really? And what's happening in family? How are the kids? And that personal connection transforms to when the consult is done, not just saying, oh, here are your medicines and, you know, go take them and come for a follow-up 3 days after, but reiterating what the doctor said in very simple language to the patient, saying, you know what, you have fever, but don't you worry. I'm right here and we'll take care of you. That reassurance means so much for that human being who has gone to seek care, that they want to go back again when they want something. And they also want to create that relationship with that clinic. And that clinic has become like a social place for a lot of those people. And we can't thank enough for Karma for doing that in our country, where we really need access to quality care in remote parts of the country. Thank you.
And there may be others. And I think, again, it's useful for us to say that Anu and Pallavi, you were involved in doing a positive deviance study for Karma, which is, you know, are there uncommon practices of the kind of nurses that you talked about, which create an experience that is rather unique. And of course, the wisdom is there and you just find a way to amplify it. Okay, good.
So, sir, the next question, because we've talked about the current times, we've talked about asking the right questions and being involved with the community. How can positive deviance be applied to the very polarized issues of today? You know, dealing, for instance, with race and religion as we see. What do we do about it?
Okay, many of you have heard me share this story. And the story is of our 15th president, Abraham Lincoln. And as you know, he probably presided on as polarized a society politically and in other ways than you can imagine. You know, the Civil War in the US, 1860s. He was the president, and the South, the American South, which wanted slavery to continue after 300 years of it being in place, and the North, which wanted in some ways to abolish slavery. There's a story during the Civil War that Lincoln was approached by a soldier, and this was the first time he was meeting the president, he was meeting the commander-in-chief. The first time he had seen Lincoln. I mean, there wasn't Aaj Tak or NDTV News at that time. There weren't many pictures of Lincoln circulating. So the soldier sees Lincoln, and first, empirically, he knows that he's tall. And as he salutes the president, the commander-in-chief, and Lincoln, extends his hand, he shakes the president's hand, and then he asks the question, "Mr. President, you're tall. How tall are you?" And without batting an eyelid, Lincoln says, "Son, like you, tall enough that my feet reach the ground. Son, like you, tall enough that my feet reach the ground." Now, why would Lincoln give such an answer? Now, if you go back and study his life, I'm a sucker for Lincoln's life. In fact, in my study, I always keep a cast of Lincoln's right hand with the Emancipation Proclamation, which he signed so as to free the Union, well, to keep the Union, to make a more perfect Union. And that is what is the thrust of your question, polarization. So too often, we who know, who have opinions, we tend to analytically differentiate. So Lincoln's answer should be, "I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall." He responds by saying, "I'm tall enough, son like you, tall enough that my feet reach the ground." And basically what he's saying is, as opposed to looking at somebody and saying, "I'm taller than you and you are shorter than me," it then translates into, "Oh, I'm of this religion and you are of that religion," which translates into, "I live in this kind of a house and look at you. I wear these kind of clothes and you wear that kind of clothes. I'm a Republican and you are a Democrat, or I'm a BJP and you are a whatever." Yeah, this polarization, and of course we are socialized into it. But Lincoln provides us with a way of thinking and a way of acting, which I think is highly relevant. Of course, with George Floyd, there's been a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of uprising, a lot of sensibility that, at least race relations, polarization, maybe we need to do something about it. And nothing can be more polarized than a person in authority, a policeman, who, let's say, is of a certain color type, white. As we know, at least in the context of the United States, the one who are policed, the victims, many of them colored, of African Americans. So my positive deviant sensibility, of course, I acknowledge, that it is a problem, but I want to, if I can, encourage a Lincolnian way of thinking while acknowledging and embracing what exists. So the question that I ask, or would like to ask, and have been asking, is, are there some white policemen who are very white, who live and work in, let's say, the American South, which has a legacy of, and who are absolutely loved by a community of colored people? And if they do exist, and if you ask that question, you'll find them. So I have been following, much like I've been following Valerie Martin and the nursing home in France, and much like I've been following the work of Daniel Quintero, who's the mayor of Medellin, a city which I love, which I have been many times. And much as I have begun to follow the work of this police officer, his name is Tommy Norman. And he's been in the police force for the last 20 years. When he was a young man, after his duty ended, he would drive into colored African-American neighborhoods. You can imagine children have a special fascination for police cars. And he would slow down, he would roll down his windows, and he would stop. He would encourage the children to sit in his car, one at a time, and give them little rides, just around the block. That was his way of developing trust with the children. If you develop trust with the children, you begin to develop trust with the families, with the neighborhoods. Officer Norman is the most loved citizen of the most colored and most African-American neighborhoods in the city of North Little Rock. And, I work in Little Rock because I'm affiliated with President Clinton's initiative, the School of Public Service. And so when there's a birthday party, Officer Norman will show up because he's invited. Usually one of his presents, he has many, but one of his presents is to bring a contraption with a police light. And those lights that do the zoing, 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 zoing. He often goes into, let's say, homes where there are disabled children. And let's say it's the birthday celebration of a disabled child who has, let's say, a wheelchair. He would go ahead and install it with a clamp on the disabled child's chair. And, so that the child could be in their neighborhood or be inside their home with the zoing, zoing, zoing going. And I'm just giving you one small illustration. He plays basketball, which is very popular. So he brings basketball and he shoots hoops. He loves to skip. A lot of, men and women skip, and he skips with them. And I would encourage you to Google him. Time has made a film on him. Newsweek has made a film on him. And what we need to do in this day and age, in my opinion, in addition to all else that is happening, is to look at the uncommon practices of an Officer Norman. And he's not the only one, believe me. There are many of them, if we only had the eyes to see them. And if you can see what is unseen, the answers are there. They've already told us how the problem can be solved, because they've solved it. And they have solved it in a holistic way, not piecemeal. And I think that's the power of positive deviance, that if you ask the right questions, you will grow in the direction of those questions. And, as academics, we have to challenge ourselves. As social change practitioners, we should challenge ourselves to ask the right questions. Ask the question, is there life here amidst death? Because life always finds a way. A little rosebud would come out of concrete. It always finds a way. And we have to be mindful of it and encourage ourselves to reflect on what kind of questions are we asking. Okay.
It's been a pleasure, of course, learning about the positive deviance approach over the years from you at the University of Texas, El Paso, and obviously working with you over the years on so many collaborative projects that yield these amazing findings and great behaviors, because the behavior is the hero, as we say in positive deviance, and not the person. So how do we find ways to encourage the behavior, to replicate the behavior, scale it up in ways, even if that scale is not 100 inches long, but find a way to do small little tweaks in the way we interact with each other so that the polarization finds a confined social bubble. And thank you so much for explaining that through your stories, because I know a lot of us come for those.
Once I happened to be in the presence of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and he asked a question. This was at Emory University. He came to the Carter Center with Jimmy Carter presiding. And he said, we often walk into institutions of higher learning where all that I see is we are trying to cultivate habits of the head. We ask people to bring their bodies, and we ask them to bring a pen or a laptop, and let's cultivate habits of the head. And he says, where are those institutions of higher learning, especially higher learning, where you also cultivate, along with habits of the head, habits of the mind, habits of the heart, and habits of the spirit. And that is very important for us. So if you look at Abe Lincoln, if you look at Valerie Martin, if you look at Officer Norman, what they have done, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama would say, is they have been able to make this rather sacred journey, the longest journey that you'd ever take between the head and the heart. And I think it's highly important that we emphasize, especially in these days of COVID-19, especially in these days of racial and religious divides, that are we willing to at least take the first step in connecting our head and our heart? And maybe that's the challenge, spoken like a professor, you just leave this as a challenge for us to wrestle with. Okay, so I will just say before I hand it to Ganeshji, and he really should have the last word, or any of his friends from Shramik Bharati, there was a wonderful quotation that passed my desk a few weeks ago, which said that I may not be able to do all that the world needs for me to do, but the world needs for me to do all that I can do. And it's a very comforting thought that, each of us is part of a little network, a little chain, and whatever little we can do in our own way, radiating out from us, we shouldn't think it's unimportant. It is indeed the only thing we can do. So,
ये 1-1.5 घंटे की मुलाकात आप लोगों से और अरविंद सिंघल की बातचीत हमारे लिए बहुत इंफॉर्मेटिव रही, एजुकेटिव रही और इंस्पायरिंग रही हमारे अपने काम के लिए. The magnitude of problem in India, where ordinary people, poor people, on one side they are struggling to save themselves from coronavirus, on another side they are struggling with the problem of hunger and starvation. And we ordinary people find ourselves in a very extraordinary situation. So, since April first week, we have been involved in all kind of support mechanisms, and whatever help and support we can provide, but we are going to stay with them. And my feeling is that however difficult situation may be present, we are going to cross all barriers. We are going to overcome. We shall overcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
thank you all.
So with this, we want to thank all of you once again for being here amidst us. And we really hope we can see all of you every Friday as we bring on another expert to throw spotlight on things that really matter. Once again, thank you so much for your generous contributions and have a good night.